In a dimly lit Moscow bar, a group of foreign bikers downed shots and roared with laughter, their rowdy antics a stark contrast to the quiet patrons. Among them sat a man in a tailored suit, calmly sipping vodka. Unimpressed by their noise, he kept to himself. When the bikers decided to mock him, they had no idea they were targeting Viktor Ivanov, a high-ranking mobster with a lethal reputation. What followed was a night they would never forget if they survived to tell the tale. The dimly lit Moscow bar buzzed with a low hum of conversation. It wasn't a flashy place, but its worn wooden tables and shelves lined with vodka bottles gave it a quiet charm. Regulars sipped their drinks, speaking in hushed tones. Among them sat Viktor Ivanov, a man of tailored suits and sharp eyes, calmly swirling a glass of vodka. He was no stranger to this corner of the city, a high-ranking mobster who preferred his power understated but absolute. The bar's peace shattered when a group of foreign bikers barged in, their leather jackets and loud laughter commanding unwanted attention. They were a boisterous lot, with no sense of the quiet tension that hung in the air. Their leader, a stocky man named Jack, strutted to the bar, slamming his fist on the counter. "Vodka, the good stuff," Jack roared, his accent cutting through the bar like a siren. The bartender glanced nervously toward Victor, who gave no visible reaction, continuing to sip his drink. The bikers' volume escalated as they toasted to nothing in particular, their crass jokes filling the small space. Victor remained calm, his presence commanding silence from those who knew better. But the bikers were oblivious. Spotting Victor seated alone at a corner table, Jack nudged his buddies with a sly grin. "What's with the suit?" he muttered loudly. "Guy looks like he's at a board meeting, not a bar." The others laughed, their voices grating against the low murmur of the bar. Victor didn't flinch, his focus remaining on his drink. This only encouraged the group. "Hey, boss man," Jack called out, stumbling slightly as he approached Victor's table. "Why so serious? Lighten up. We'll buy you a drink, if you can handle it." Victor finally looked up, his gaze meeting Jack's. His expression was calm, unreadable, but the weight behind his eyes made Jack falter slightly. The mobster said nothing. Taking another measured sip of vodka, Jack sneered, trying to recover. "Too good to talk to us?" He reached for Victor's glass, intending to take it. In one swift motion, Victor grabbed Jack's wrist, his grip ironclad. The room fell silent, every patron holding their breath. Victor said, his voice low but lethal, "You don't want to spill." Jack yanked his arm back, chuckling awkwardly, but the tension was palpable now. Victor released him without another word and stood, straightening his suit jacket. He placed cash on the table and turned toward the door. On his way out, he paused by the bartender and whispered something inaudible, before disappearing into the cold Moscow night. The bikers laughed nervously, trying to mask their unease. "What a stiff," Jack muttered, waving for another round, but the bartender's hands trembled as he poured the drinks. The regulars began quietly leaving, one by one, their faces pale. "What's their problem?" one of the bikers asked. The bartender leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have done that," Jack smirked. "You don't know who he is," the bartender replied, his voice shaking. "You just insulted Viktor Ivanov." The laughter died instantly. Jack frowned. "Who's Viktor Ivanov?" The bartender's answer was grim. "A man you don't mess with and live to tell about it." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, brushing off the warning. But outside, unseen eyes were already watching. The cold Moscow air bit harshly as Viktor Ivanov stepped outside the bar, his breath curling into faint wisps in the night. He adjusted his tailored coat and walked away without haste, blending into the dimly lit street. To the untrained eye, he was just another man heading home, but to those who knew him, this quiet exit spoke volumes. Inside the bar, the bikers remained oblivious to the gravity of their actions. Jack leaned back in his chair, tossing back another shot of vodka, his earlier bravado returning. "What a drama queen," he scoffed. "Guy walks out like he owns the place." His crew laughed, but unease lingered in the air. The bartender, now polishing glasses with shaky hands, stole glances at the door as if expecting someone, or something, to arrive. "You seem nervous," Greg, one of the bikers, remarked, eyeing the bartender. The man didn't respond at first, then muttered, "You should leave." Jack smirked, waving him off. "Relax, buddy. We're paying customers. Let's have another round." The bartender set down the glass, leaning forward with a grave expression. "You insulted Viktor Ivanov. Do you know what that means?" Jack rolled his eyes. "Yeah, you mentioned his name. What's the big deal? Is he the mayor or something?" The bartender shook his head. "He's much worse than the mayor. Viktor doesn't tolerate disrespect, especially from outsiders like you." Greg frowned, the weight of the bartender's words sinking in. What do you mean? What's he going to do? The bartender's voice dropped to a whisper. He doesn't need to do anything. His men will handle it. You've made a mistake, a very big one. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows over the motorcycles parked in a row. One by one, those shadows shifted as figures emerged from the darkness. Victor's associates, dressed in long coats, inspected the bikes, their faces impassive. Tires were slashed, gas tanks punctured, and keys disappeared into the night. Back in the bar, the bikers noticed the other patrons quietly filing out. The room emptied quickly, leaving only the bartender, who wiped his hands nervously on his apron. "Where's everyone going?" Danny, the youngest biker, asked, his voice cracking slightly. "They know better than to stay," the bartender said grimly. When the bikers finally decided to leave, their confidence wavered. Outside, the bitter cold was matched only by the sight of their vandalized motorcycles. Jack swore loudly, kicking at a flat tire. "Who the hell did this?" No one answered, but a faint chill seemed to settle over the street. The bar's neon sign flickered as the bartender locked the door, offering no sympathy. Greg muttered, scanning the empty road. "We can't ride back like this." Jack growled in frustration, looking down the street where Victor had disappeared. "We find him. He thinks he can intimidate us? Let's see how tough he really is." Danny hesitated. "Maybe we should just cut our losses. This feels bigger than we thought." Jack shook his head. "Nobody messes with us and gets away with it." As they started down the street, a black car rolled past them slowly, its tinted windows reflecting the faint light of the bar. It didn't stop, but the bikers couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Far away, Victor sat in a sleek office overlooking the city. One of his men entered, bowing slightly. Victor nodded, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "Let them come," he said softly. "They will learn." The cold morning light crept over Moscow, but the bikers were anything but refreshed. They'd spent the night walking back to their hotel, bitter and grumbling about their slashed tires and punctured gas tanks. Jack, their leader, was still fuming, his temper barely contained. "This is ridiculous," Jack growled, pacing in their small hotel room. "Who does this guy think he is? He messes with us and we're just supposed to sit here?" Greg, sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbed his temples. "Jack, think about it. We don't know who we're dealing with. That bartender seemed terrified of him. Maybe we should just back off and leave this alone." Jack slammed his fist on the table. "Back off? Are you serious? He disrespected us, messed with our bikes. I don't care who he is, nobody does that to me." Danny, the youngest in the group, sat nervously by the window, peering out into the street below. "Maybe Greg's right," he said hesitantly. "This feels wrong. I mean, we're not in our territory here. We don't know how things work." Jack spun to face him, his eyes blazing. "What are you? Scared? Just because we're in Moscow doesn't mean we let some wannabe gangster push us around." Greg sighed, leaning back against the wall. "What's your plan then? Confront him? You think he's going to apologize and pay for our bikes?" Jack smirked. "Exactly. Let him know we're not backing down, and make him fix this mess." The others exchanged uneasy glances, but Jack's confidence left them little room to argue. Against their better judgment, they agreed to head back to the bar where it all began. When they arrived, the bar was closed, its neon sign dark and the windows shuttered. A note taped to the door read, "Closed until further notice." The street was eerily quiet, and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic. "This is weird," Greg muttered, glancing around. "Too quiet." Jack ignored him, pounding on the door. "Come on, open up," he shouted, his voice echoing down the empty street. No one answered. Danny shuffled uneasily. "Maybe he's gone. We should just..." Before he could finish, a sleek black car turned the corner and slowed as it approached them. The tinted windows rolled down just enough for a man in a dark suit to speak. "You've been expected," he said in a thick Russian accent. The bikers froze, the gravity of the moment settling over them like a weight. Jack stepped forward, his bravado faltering slightly. "And if we don't?" The man's expression didn't change. "You will." Two more cars appeared behind them, boxing them in. The unspoken threat was clear. With no other options, the bikers reluctantly climbed into the waiting car, the cold leather seats adding to their unease. The drive was silent, the city's familiar streets replaced by industrial backroads. Tension filled the air as the bikers exchanged nervous glances. Danny finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where are they taking us?" Greg shook his head, his jaw clenched. "To him." Jack's fists tightened, his earlier confidence now replaced with quiet dread. As the cars pulled up to a massive, dimly lit warehouse, the doors opened. Viktor Ivanov stood waiting, his calm demeanor more chilling than any shouted threat. The massive warehouse loomed ahead, its metal walls reflecting the faint glow of nearby streetlights. The bikers were forced out of the black car, their boots crunching against the gravel as they exchanged uneasy glances. The air felt colder here, heavier, as if the very ground carried the weight of unspoken threats. Viktor Ivanov stood near the entrance, his tailored coat draped elegantly over his shoulders. His calm, unyielding gaze met each of them in turn, dissecting their bravado piece by piece. Behind him, several men in dark suits stood like statues, their hands clasped in front of them, faces devoid of emotion. "Gentlemen," Viktor began, his voice smooth and deliberate. Jack stepped forward, forcing a grin. "Yeah, great to see you too, buddy. You mind telling us why your guys trashed our bikes? That's not exactly how you treat tourists." Viktor tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Tourists, you say? Yet I don't recall inviting you to insult me in my city." Jack opened his mouth to retort, but Viktor raised a hand, silencing him effortlessly. "You walked into my bar, you mocked me, you disrupted my peace, and then you expected to leave without consequence." Greg shifted uncomfortably, casting a nervous glance at the suited men. "We didn't mean anything by it. It was just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Viktor repeated, his tone deceptively mild. "Perhaps, but misunderstandings have a cost." The doors to the warehouse creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Stacks of crates lined the walls, and in the center a single table with a metal case sat under a harsh overhead light. Viktor gestured for them to enter. Reluctantly, the bikers obeyed, the suited men closing in behind them. Once inside, Viktor approached the table and opened the case. Inside was a sleek black briefcase, its contents hidden. He turned to face the bikers. "You will perform a task for me," Viktor said. "A simple delivery. The contents of this case must reach their destination without fail. Consider it an opportunity to repay the insult you have given me." Jack scoffed, crossing his arms. "And if we say no?" Viktor's lips curved into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Then you leave here with nothing. No bikes, no honor, no guarantees of safety. And I assure you, Moscow is not kind to those who disrespect its rules." Danny's voice cracked as he spoke. "What's in the case?" Viktor replied, his gaze like ice. "Is not your concern. Your only task is to deliver it intact." The bikers hesitated, their instincts screaming at them to walk away, but the walls of the warehouse felt like they were closing in, and Viktor's calm authority left no room for argument. Jack finally nodded, his jaw tight. Viktor nodded approvingly. "You will be watched. Any deviation, any mistake, and your debt grows." One of Viktor's men stepped forward, handing Jack a phone with a GPS route already programmed. "Follow this exactly," the man instructed, "and do not attract attention." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances as they left the warehouse with the case. Outside, their damaged bikes had been replaced with sleek, unmarked motorcycles, an unspoken reminder of the power Viktor wielded. As they rode into the night, the streets of Moscow felt darker than ever, every shadow a potential threat. They were no longer tourists, but pawns in a game they didn't understand. The bikers rode through Moscow's dark streets, the weight of the mysterious case adding to their growing unease. The sleek, unmarked motorcycles purred beneath them, their headlights cutting through the cold night. The GPS guided them down winding alleys and desolate roads, far from the bustling city center. "This is insane," Danny muttered, his voice crackling through the helmet communicator. "We don't even know what we're carrying." "Shut up and ride," Jack barked. "Let's just get this over with." The GPS led them to a narrow bridge spanning the icy Moskva River. The air seemed to freeze as they approached, and the tension between them was palpable. On the other side of the bridge, a black van waited, its engine idling. The bikers slowed, exchanging wary glances as they parked their bikes a few meters away. "This must be the drop-off," Greg said, his voice tight. "Let's hand it over and go." Jack dismounted, gripping the case tightly. The van's doors opened, and two men in dark coats stepped out. One was tall and wiry, with sharp eyes that flicked between the bikers. The other was stockier, his face partially obscured by a scarf. Neither spoke as they approached. "You have the package?" the wiry man asked in heavily accented English. Jack hesitated but nodded, holding out the case. The man reached for it, but before he could take it, the sound of screeching tires echoed across the bridge. Everyone turned as another vehicle barreled toward them, headlights blazing. "Ambush!" Greg shouted, reaching for his bike. The black van's men drew weapons, their calm demeanor replaced by urgency. From the speeding vehicle, masked attackers leapt out, firing warning shots into the air. Chaos erupted. The bikers scrambled for cover as bullets ricocheted off the pavement. Jack clung to the case, adrenaline surging through him as he ducked behind his bike. "What the hell is going on?" Danny yelled, his voice trembling. "They're after the case," Greg shouted back, revving his motorcycle. "We need to move!" The van's men returned fire, their precision showing they were no strangers to combat. But the attackers outnumbered them, their relentless assault forcing the bikers into action. Jack made a split-second decision, gesturing to the others. "We're taking the case! Get out of here!" They mounted their bikes as the firefight raged on. Jack tucked the case into a compartment on his bike, and the group sped off, weaving through the bridge as bullets zipped past them. The attackers gave chase, their vehicles roaring to life. "What the hell is in this thing?" Danny screamed as they swerved through narrow streets, dodging obstacles and gunfire. "Does it matter?" Jack yelled back. "Just keep riding." The pursuit stretched through the outskirts of Moscow, the attackers relentless. The bikers' hearts pounded as they navigated treacherous terrain, their riding skills pushed to the limit. Finally, a sharp turn led them into an abandoned industrial area, where they skidded to a halt behind a stack of rusted containers. The attackers' vehicles slowed, their headlights scanning the area. The bikers killed their engines, holding their breath as the lights passed over them. After a tense moment, the vehicles sped off, the attackers apparently losing their trail. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack pulled the case from his bike, glaring at it as if it might explode. "Whatever this is, it's not worth dying for." Greg shook his head. "We're in too deep now. We deliver it or we're dead anyway." Danny's hands trembled as he spoke. "How did we get into this? What are we even doing?" Jack didn't answer. He glanced at the GPS, the next waypoint flashing ominously. "Let's move. This isn't over." As they rode into the night once more, their fear gave way to grim determination. They weren't just delivering a package, they were fighting for survival in a game far beyond their control. The bikers pressed onward, the GPS directing them through the desolate industrial outskirts of Moscow. The city lights were far behind them now, replaced by the oppressive quiet of abandoned warehouses and icy roads. The mysterious case felt heavier with every mile, its presence a constant reminder of the unknown stakes they faced. Danny's voice crackled nervously over the helmet communicator. "What if those guys find us again? We barely made it out last time." Jack tightened his grip on the handlebars. His jaw clenched. "We're sticking to the route. No mistakes." "Yeah, because that's worked out so well," Greg muttered, though his tone lacked its usual sarcasm. The weight of their situation was starting to crush even him. The GPS led them to a stretch of road flanked by tall, skeletal trees. Snow began to fall, the flakes swirling under the dim glow of their headlights. Ahead, the faint outline of another vehicle came into view. A black SUV idling on the roadside, Greg muttered. Another welcoming committee. As they slowed, a man stepped out of the SUV, his silhouette sharp against the falling snow. He wore a long coat, his face partially hidden by a fur hat. His posture was relaxed, but something about him radiated control. Jack stopped his bike, motioning for the others to stay back. He approached cautiously, the case still strapped to his bike. "You're late," the man said in flawless English, his tone casual but cold. "I was beginning to think you didn't value your lives." Jack's eyes narrowed. The man smirked, his breath visible in the cold air. "That doesn't matter. What matters is the package." He gestured toward the case on Jack's bike. "Hand it over." Jack hesitated, his mind racing. The ambush on the bridge flashed through his thoughts. "You're not part of Victor's group, are you?" The man's smirk widened. "What do you think?" Before Jack could react, the sound of more engines roared in the distance. From behind the trees, several motorcycles appeared, their riders dressed in dark leather and armed with crowbars and chains. "Of course," Greg muttered, revving his engine. "It's a damn trap." The man stepped back, his demeanor unchanging. "You've been in over your head since the moment you stepped into that bar. Consider this the price of ignorance." The bikers had no time to process his words. The attackers surged forward, their motorcycles kicking up snow and gravel as they charged. Jack swung onto his bike, yelling, "Move! Get out of here!" The bikers sped off, weaving between the trees as the attackers pursued. Chains whipped through the air, one narrowly missing Danny as he swerved. The terrain was treacherous, the snow turning the ground slick and uneven. Greg managed to knock one of the attackers off his bike with a hard kick, but another slammed into him from the side, sending him skidding dangerously close to a tree. He recovered just in time, his bike fishtailing but staying upright. Jack focused on the GPS, the route twisting through the dense forest. "Stick to the path," he yelled. "Don't stop for anything." The attackers were relentless, their knowledge of the terrain giving them the advantage. Danny's voice cracked through the communicator. "They're everywhere. What do we do?" "Just keep going," Jack shouted, his knuckles white as he gripped the handlebars. Suddenly, the path opened into a clearing, and in the distance a dimly lit cabin came into view. The GPS indicated it as the next waypoint. Jack skidded to a stop, his breath visible in the freezing air. "This must be it," he said, his voice strained. "We make our stand here." The bikers quickly positioned their bikes in a defensive formation as the attackers closed in, their headlights piercing the darkness. Jack unstrapped the case, gripping it tightly. He glanced at Greg and Danny, their faces pale but determined. "Whatever happens," Jack said, his voice low, "we're not letting this case fall into their hands." The attackers roared into the clearing, and the bikers braced for the fight of their lives. The roar of engines filled the snowy clearing as the attackers closed in, their headlights casting jagged shadows against the trees. Jack, Greg, and Danny tightened their grip on their handlebars, the cold biting into their hands. The mysterious case rested in Jack's saddlebag, a prize that seemed to be worth their lives, if only they understood why. "Stick together," Jack shouted over the din, his voice firm. "Don't let them separate us." The first wave of attackers struck with chains and crowbars, their weapons whipping through the air. Greg swerved sharply to avoid a blow, his tires kicking up snow as he countered with a swing of his helmet. The makeshift weapon connected with one rider, sending him tumbling into the icy ground. Danny was less prepared, barely dodging a chain that snagged the corner of his jacket. "I can't do this," he yelled, panic cracking his voice. "You don't have a choice," Jack barked, slamming his bike into an oncoming attacker and sending them both skidding. He recovered quickly, his eyes darting to the cabin ahead. "We need to get to cover." The bikers maneuvered toward the cabin, using their bikes as shields to fend off the relentless assault. The attackers weren't just after the case, they were trying to eliminate them entirely. Each swing of a chain or crowbar came with lethal intent, and the bikers quickly realized that hesitation meant death. Greg pulled up alongside Jack, panting heavily. "If we don't take them out now, they'll just follow us." Jack nodded grimly, pulling his bike to a stop in front of the cabin. "Fine, let's end this." The three bikers dismounted, positioning themselves in a triangle with their bikes and the cabin at their backs. The attackers slowed, their engines growling like predators circling prey. One of them stepped forward, his helmet concealing his face but his voice carrying a mocking tone. "Hand over the case," he said, "and maybe we'll let you walk away." Jack smirked, his exhaustion replaced by a defiant edge. "You think we're stupid? You haven't let up since the bridge." The attacker tilted his head. "Then you've made your choice." With a sharp gesture, the attackers surged forward. Jack swung the heavy saddlebag, catching one rider in the chest and knocking him off his bike. Greg and Danny fought back with everything they had, using tools and anything they could grab to defend themselves. The clearing became a chaotic melee, the sound of engines, shouts, and the clash of metal echoing through the cold night. Greg tackled one attacker off his bike, rolling through the snow as they wrestled for control of a crowbar. Danny managed to blind another with a spray of snow from his tires, but his hands shook as he tried to fend off a second assailant. Jack held his ground near the cabin door, swinging the saddlebag like a mace to keep the attackers at bay. The tide began to turn when one of Victor's men arrived, a sharp crack splitting the air as a warning shot rang out. The attackers froze, their confidence faltering. From the darkness, a sleek black car rolled into the clearing, its headlights piercing the chaos. Victor stepped out, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the carnage. His men followed, their weapons drawn, but not yet fired. The attackers, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat into the shadows of the forest. Victor approached the bikers, his footsteps crunching softly in the snow. "Impressive," he said, his tone measured. "You've held your ground." Jack, bloodied but standing, glared at him. "What the hell is in this case? Why is everyone trying to kill us for it?" Victor's lips curved into a faint smile. "You'll find out soon enough. For now, you've earned the right to continue." As Victor's men secured the area, Jack, Greg, and Danny leaned against their bikes, exhaustion catching up with them. They had survived another test, but at what cost? The snow continued to fall as the clearing fell silent, the retreating attackers leaving behind only the hum of Victor's men securing the area. Jack, Greg, and Danny sat slumped against their bikes, bruised, bloodied, and exhausted. The mysterious case remained unopened, but its significance was now undeniable. Victor stood before them, his polished shoes untouched by the chaos around him. His calm demeanor sent a chill through the bikers more potent than the frigid Moscow air. "You've managed to survive," he said, his voice steady. "That is no small feat." Jack struggled to his feet, glaring at Victor. "We didn't survive because of you. We're out here risking our lives for a case we don't even understand. What's in it, Victor? What's worth all this?" Victor's expression didn't waver. "You are alive because you followed my orders. That is all you need to know." Greg groaned as he pushed himself upright. "We deserve some answers. We've been shot at, chased, and beaten. If you want us to keep doing this, you need to tell us the truth." For a moment, Victor seemed to consider their demand. Then, with a slow nod, he gestured toward the case still strapped to Jack's bike. "Very well. You've earned a glimpse of what you're protecting." Jack hesitated before unstrapping the case and placing it on a nearby crate. Victor's men watched silently, their hands hovering near their concealed weapons. Jack flipped open the latches and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, a collection of sealed documents, flash drives, and a small locked metal box gleamed under the dim light. Danny asked, his voice trembling. "Papers and a box?" Victor stepped forward, closing the case with a decisive snap. "These are not just papers. They are leverage, information that could topple powerful men, disrupt governments, and ignite wars. What you are carrying is power." Greg exhaled sharply. "And we're just supposed to trust that you're the good guy in all this?" Victor's faint smile returned, though it lacked warmth. "Good and bad are illusions. What matters is who controls the narrative. Tonight, you've ensured that narrative stays where it belongs." Jack's hands balled into fists. "Why us? Why drag us into this?" "You chose yourselves," Victor replied. "You insulted me in my bar. You brought this upon yourselves. But now, you are no longer just bystanders. You are part of something larger, whether you like it or not." Danny shook his head, his voice cracking. "We didn't sign up for this," Victor agreed. "But now you will finish it. The destination is close. Deliver the case, and your debt will be settled." The bikers exchanged uncertain glances, but Victor's men were already preparing for the next leg of the journey. A convoy formed around the group, sleek black vehicles and armed riders ready to escort them. The stakes had risen, but there was no turning back now. As the group rode into the night once more, the gravity of Victor's words weighed heavily on them. They weren't just carrying a package, they were holding the keys to a power struggle far beyond their comprehension. Jack's voice crackled over the communicator. "We finish this and then we're done. No more surprises." Greg sighed. "You really think Victor's going to let us walk away?" Danny didn't answer. None of them believed it. Ahead, the GPS marked the final waypoint, a location deep in the heart of Moscow's frozen outskirts. The road ahead was long and treacherous, and the bikers couldn't shake the feeling that their trials were far from over. The convoy moved through Moscow's frozen outskirts, the night silent but charged with tension. Jack, Greg, and Danny rode in formation, flanked by Victor's armed men on motorcycles and sleek black SUVs. The bikers felt like prisoners under escort rather than allies in a mission, their every movement shadowed by Victor's cold authority. The GPS indicated their destination was only a few kilometers away, deep in a sprawling industrial complex. Rusted fences lined the narrow road, and faint plumes of smoke rose from distant chimneys. The atmosphere was suffocating, the oppressive silence broken only by the hum of engines. "What's the plan when we get there?" Greg asked over the communicator, his voice heavy with doubt. "Deliver the case, get out alive," Jack replied tersely. "Same as always." Danny's voice cracked. "What if this is a trap? What if Victor's just using us to clean up his mess?" Jack tightened his grip on the handlebars. "Then we finish this and figure it out after. Focus." The convoy came to a halt outside a massive steel warehouse, its floodlights casting long shadows over the snow-covered ground. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their sharp movements and heavy weapons leaving no doubt that this was no ordinary drop-off. Victor stepped out of one of the SUVs, his long coat billowing slightly in the cold wind. He motioned for the bikers to dismount and bring the case. "This is the end of your journey," he said. "Do as instructed and you may leave with your lives." Jack unstrapped the case from his bike, his every movement slow and deliberate. The three bikers exchanged uneasy glances, but followed Victor toward the warehouse entrance. The guards stepped aside, their cold stares tracking every step. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous and dimly lit, the air thick with the metallic tang of machinery. In the center of the space stood a table surrounded by stern-faced men in suits. One of them, a heavy-set man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Victor. "You're late," the scarred man growled in Russian. "I had unforeseen complications," Victor replied smoothly, gesturing toward the bikers. These men ensured the delivery. The scarred man's eyes flicked to Jack, Greg, and Danny, his expression darkening. "Foreigners? You trust them with this? They've proven themselves," Victor said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The case is here. That is all that matters." Jack placed the case on the table, his heart pounding as the scarred man reached for it. He unlatched the lid, his eyes scanning its contents before he nodded in approval. It's intact. The tension in the room seemed to ease slightly, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Victor turned to the bikers, his expression unreadable. Your part is finished. You may leave. Greg stepped forward. Just like that? After everything we've been through, we just walk out? Victor's gaze hardened. Do you wish to stay? Before Greg could answer, the warehouse doors burst open, and gunfire erupted. Rival factions stormed in, their weapons blazing as chaos erupted. Jack instinctively dove for cover, the sounds of shouting and bullets filling the air. Danny screamed, clutching his helmet as he crawled behind a crate. I knew it. I knew this was a trap. Victor's men returned fire with precision, but the attackers were relentless. Jack grabbed Greg and Danny, pulling them toward an exit. We're getting out of here now! Amid the chaos, Victor caught Jack's gaze. For a moment, Jack saw something in the mobster's expression. Not panic, but calculation. Victor shouted over the gunfire. Run if you must, but remember, debts are rarely forgiven. The bikers bolted, weaving through the chaos toward their motorcycles. As they sped off into the snowy night, the sound of the firefight echoed behind them, the weight of Victor's warning heavy in their minds. The icy Moscow night swallowed the bikers as they tore away from the warehouse, their engines roaring in unison. The sounds of gunfire faded behind them, but the weight of the chaos lingered in their minds. Snow whipped past, blurring the dark road ahead, but there was no time to stop. Jack, Greg, and Danny rode in silence, each consumed by the gravity of what they'd just survived. Finally, they pulled off the road into a shadowy alley, parking their bikes and slumping against a crumbling wall. Greg ripped off his helmet, his face pale and drenched in sweat. What the hell just happened back there? Did Victor set us up? Jack shook his head, trying to piece it all together. I don't think so. He was in the line of fire, too. That was someone else. Maybe the people after the case. Danny shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around him. I don't care who it was. I just want out of this. Victor said our part was done, right? That means we're free. Greg scoffed. You think it's that simple? Guys like Victor don't let you walk away clean. He said it himself. Debts don't get forgiven. Jack stood, pacing. Then we disappear. Leave Moscow. Leave Russia. Hell, leave Europe if we have to. And what happens if he finds us? Greg snapped. You've seen his reach. You think we can outrun that? Silence fell as the gravity of Greg's words sank in. Jack clenched his fists, his mind racing for a solution. Before anyone could speak, a sleek black car pulled into the alley, its headlights cutting through the gloom. The three froze, their hands instinctively moving to their handlebars. The car stopped, and a single figure stepped out. Viktor Ivanov. His coat was dusted with snow, and his expression was as composed as ever, though his eyes held a cold sharpness. He approached slowly, his boots crunching against the frozen ground. I told you to leave, Victor said, his voice calm but heavy with authority. Here you are. Jack stepped forward, his jaw tight. We did what you asked. The case is delivered. The debt's paid. Victor tilted his head slightly. Do you truly believe that your actions have no lasting consequences? That you can insult a man like me and walk away without scars? Danny stammered. We didn't know who you were. If we had, that ignorance is precisely why you're alive. Victor interrupted, his gaze piercing. Had you known and still disrespected me, this conversation wouldn't be happening. Greg's voice was laced with desperation. So what now? Are we free or not? Victor studied them, his silence as oppressive as the cold air. Finally he spoke. You are free, but freedom is a fragile thing. Remember, I allowed you to leave. Do not make me regret that decision. Jack met Victor's gaze, his pride burning but his survival instinct stronger. We won't come back. Victor smirked faintly. Moscow doesn't tolerate fools twice. Without another word, Victor turned and walked back to his car. The engine purred to life, and the vehicle disappeared into the snowy night, leaving the bikers alone in the alley. The three stood in silence for a moment before Greg finally spoke. Do you think he'll keep his word? Jack shrugged, his expression unreadable. I think Victor doesn't waste his time on people who aren't worth it. We're not a threat to him anymore. Danny exhaled shakily. Jack muttered, strapping on his helmet. But let's not stick around to test his patience. The bikers mounted their bikes and rode off, the city lights fading behind them. Moscow had left its mark, a lesson carved into their bones. They had survived Viktor Ivanov, but the scars of the night would stay with them forever. A reminder that in his world, respect was not optional, and freedom was always conditional.